All right, we will be moving on to our next session, which is our student panel. So I'm just going to be reading our introduction for our key facilitator, and then her students will come up as well. Associate Professor Mera Penehira descends from the tribal nation of Ngati Rokawa, Rangitane, and Ngaiterangi. Mera is a mother, academic, and activist in her community. She completed her master's in educational psychology at the University of Auckland. Her doctoral research centered on Maori women's health and traditional healing practices, in particular moko, traditional Maori skin carving. Mera has a passion for Native and Indigenous women's well-being, the ocean, va'a, and how these intersect. Mera is the International Indigenous Doctoral Program Co-Coordinator in the School of Indigenous Graduate Studies at Te Whaere, Wananga o Awanuiarangi, Aotearoa. She works with students in Hawaii, Washington State, and Aotearoa. Earlier this month, Mera was awarded the prestigious National New Zealand Tertiary Teacher Excellence Award from the Minister of Education. So without further ado, I'm going to invite up Mera Penehira, as well as her students.
Kawea mai ko ngā hua o tēnei rā. Hei whakamātau atu, hei whakamātau mai. Nau mai rā, tau mai rā. E. Kia ora mai tātou. Tuatahi rā. Ka mihi ki te menenga. Ko tai mai tēnei ahi. Nā reira kia mōhio ko Waiahau. Ko tararua te maunga, ko Waikawa te awa, ko Tainui te waka. Ko Tainui te marae. Ko kapu manawa whiti te whare. Ko Ngāti Raukawa te iwi. Anō nei, ko Ngaiterangi, ko Rangitāne hoki nō reira. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. I just want to firstly acknowledge the nation on whose lands we stand today, the Puyallup Nation, tēnā koutou. I acknowledge and greet you from Aotearoa. I greet your ancestors from my ancestors. I greet your lands, your oceans, your rivers, your mountains, and your people, your elders, your grandchildren, your children, the generations before and after them. Tēnā koutou, kia ora tātou katoa. Also want to, I'm really happy to be here, by the way. I'm a little bit nervous, but that's my usual, so never mind. So I want to acknowledge the students and wider community of UW Tacoma, your faculty and staff, and all seniors who are present here today. I want to especially acknowledge those responsible for creating a space to consider, and I hope action, Indigenising education, and where we can truly challenge ourselves to practice decolonising pedagogies. So I guess in being here, we are all signing up to this invitation to do just that. Just before I continue on and do some of that, want to also let you know that we have two students here that will be sharing their research on this panel after my little quick talk, and Patsy and Michelle will introduce themselves and talk about their work after myself. We also have one of our adjunct faculty in the room, which is a wonderful surprise, so Dr. Alan Parker will make some concluding remarks at the end of the presentation. All right. Oh, I forgot about my PowerPoint. Oh, good. There we go. So in my introduction, in my own language, I told you that I'm from several tribal nations, and the pictures here just further expand on that introduction. The first is of, which side's it on? Over there on my right. The first is of the ancestral house of the lands in which I was raised, the lands of Ngāti Maniapoto. The middle picture represents the lands in which I currently live, by showing you our youth from Te Kuru Kaupapa Māori o Hoani Waititi Marae. These youth are from our urban marae, or our urban meeting house, and our Māori immersion school, which was the first Māori immersion school in Aotearoa. So this is one of the major heartbeats of decolonising education in our lands. This picture represents those that made a stand and said that the education system was not meeting our needs. So we built our own school, we developed our own curriculum, we decolonised education by remembering how to indigenise education. So the point I want to make, just really quickly, is that indigenising education and indigenising the academy is not something new. This is about remembering how it always was for us as Indigenous peoples. We had our own education systems, we had our own university systems, and those were implicitly, intrinsically, everything about them was Indigenous. But re-indigenising, by remembering who we are, how we learn, how we teach, and being brave enough to stand against the system and just do it. Now our immersion schools are recognised by the system. Previously, the beginning parents of these schools were threatened with court action and with arrest for withdrawing their children from what was the compulsory education system. This year, this school, in the middle picture, won an award, a top national award. So things have changed over time. The final picture is my closest ancestral home. This is the house of my grandmother's ancestors. This is called Kapu Manawawhiti, the place of both our spiritual and everyday grounding. So these are the kinds of spaces that are critical to who we are and who we need to remain being in our various roles in academia. Thank you. Whether you're a student, staff, or faculty member, this is what our institutions are so very fortunate to receive when they receive the gift of a Native or Indigenous scholar, staff, or faculty member. So I want to explain to you just a little bit about the institution and school that I come from, and then later how we've come to develop a relationship and be teaching here on the UWT campus. So my institution is Te Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi, as Ned Rolani so eloquently said in my introduction. It's one of 4 tribal tertiary institutions, and it's the only one of those that provides the opportunity to study at the highest level, at the doctoral level. I'm an associate professor of the school and director of the International Indigenous Doctoral Program. But until about 18 months ago, I was with the largest of our English medium universities, the University of Auckland. So I understand the importance, the struggle and the necessity of re-indigenising and decolonising the university space. I know that intimately. I understand also the joy and the ongoing challenges of reclaiming our tribal university spaces and the complexities of how those spaces need to coexist, at times intersect, and how they can be beneficial to each other rather than tearing each other apart. Because I'm here today as a tribal university faculty working in a US university in a really unique relationship, it's a relationship that, as Mark mentioned this morning, we will continue to work on to improve, not for ourselves, but for better academic and research outcomes, and ones that meet the heart of the people we are concerned with. I'll talk a little bit more about the heart shortly. So we have the only international Indigenous program in New Zealand, and this is indeed a pretty new space internationally. So I want to talk to these points on the slide up there, just to explain. The main point I want to make is that our program is not academically or institutionally generated. It has come about because of the desire of Native and Indigenous nations, and it is about Native and Indigenous academic creativity. So when you do something for the first time, it's got to be creative, right? And we're doing this alongside some supportive institutions such as UW Tacoma. It's a relationship, I think, that works to nurture careful and reciprocal further relationships that ultimately result in better spaces for Native and Indigenous students, teaching practice and research. So it's not our intention as a tribal university from Aotearoa to remain doing this in the US. It's our intention rather to support and build the capacity of the Indigenous nations that we're working with. In doing so, we're certainly receiving much capacity building ourselves. It's just that often it's easier for us as Native and Indigenous peoples to have other Native and Indigenous peoples accepted into our institutions first, who build, make and create and support Indigenous nations of here to do that for themselves. The capacity already exists. It's actually about opening the doors and creating that space. I don't think I need to read out those. I'll move on. Okay. So what is Indigenising the Academy? I think first and foremost it's about values, but not values that come from our academic heads. Values that come from the minds, hearts and souls of our Indigenous beings. I want to talk you through the values of our institution of Awanuiarangi, just as a fast track to understanding us. I want you also to consider that what we teach is for our doctoral candidates to consider how they embody these values in their research, but more importantly in their daily lives. All of us, students, staff and faculty, need to know the values that underpin our work and that will keep us honest, essentially. So first and foremost up the top there, you can see the words tika, pono and aroha. Working in truth, staying correct to our being and working from the heart. Those are the core values that will ensure the maintenance of indigeneity in our institution and in our work. So I invite you to think about what are your core values. How do they match or how are they different from the institutions, from the schools, from the universities, from your communities that you work and live in? So the first value you can see at the top there, manaakitanga, always acting with dignity and in the spirit of generosity. That was something noted by our first speaker this morning also. Kaitiakitanga, being accountable to our academic environment and tribal nations alike. And that's no mean feat sometimes. Just think about, if you're undertaking research and you need to apply for ethical approval, what are the ethics of the institution that you have to meet? What are the ethics of the communities that you're working with that, of course, you are accountable to? And what are your own personal ethics? How are those the same? How are they different? How transparent are we prepared to be about those? What is our bottom line when our personal ethics don't match or no longer match those of the universities whom we're trying to achieve a qualification with? I think those are some big questions for you to consider, and to consider whether you're locating yourself in an institution that matches your ethics, or whether you're locating yourself in an institution where you're in constant challenge. And as Native and Indigenous peoples, I actually think it's important for us to be in both of those spaces, not at the same time. But I think that Native and Indigenous peoples need to maintain visibility in institutions that are not necessarily Native and Indigenous or even friendly to Native and Indigenous, because that's one of the spaces where we can create change. But another way that we can challenge those institutions to make change is from within our own institutions. So I think both of those things are important. If we can model how much closer our ethics and values are when we're working within our own tribal universities, if we can model that to these other institutions, that's a way also of creating change. We don't have to do it from within, but I think really helpful to have a bit of both. Whanaungatanga, that's essentially relationships, reciprocal responsibilities to each other and to our vision. That is reciprocity between students and faculty, students and staff, all of that. Pūmautanga, to support and commit to doing the right thing in the right way. Tumu whakaara, being leaders, decision makers and navigators. And sometimes as Native Indigenous people, we've got to be prepared to do that pretty early on because the leaders and shakers might not actually exist above you. So sometimes you find yourself in those positions earlier than you might want to be. But if you draw on the knowledge, wisdom, the experience of your ancestors, you're ready. You just got to remember it. Okay, getting there. So I thought too, we've got quite a mixed audience, but I wanted to share with you what our actual doctoral program looks like. And hopefully I can do that without scaring you off. Because it's my belief that if you're prepared to put in the hard yards and do the hard work, a doctoral degree is really, really achievable. It's not easy, it is difficult, it can be a long journey. If it was easy, everyone would be a doctor, right? They're not. So, but it's very doable, it's very achievable, and these two will show you that soon. So it's a 4-year program, globally recognised. The first 2 years are taught. So the way it operates here with our cohorts is I come over here 4 times a year and we spend 3 days together. The first 2 years, those 3 days are in kind of lectures, workshops, going through course content. You have assignments to do that are due by a set date and so on and so forth. So the first 2 years are very collective, collaborative, you're working alongside others. The second 2 years, by the time you get to the end of the first 2, you've completed a research proposal and an ethics application, and ideally you're just ready to launch into doing your individual research topics that we've worked hard to refine in those first 2 years. So the second 2 years we continue to meet 4 times a year, but those meetings take on a bit of a different shape, where they're more conversations one-on-one between, at this time, myself as a supervisor and the doctoral candidates. We have some group sharing times, we have counsellors. No, we don't have counsellors, but sometimes we wonder if we should, because it is quite an arduous journey. So after 2 years of doing your own research, ideally you have a nice big fat dissertation that you're ready to submit for examination, and shortly afterwards, maybe about 3 months after, you'll go through your oral examination and you can walk out the door and call yourself Doctor whoever you are. So we have candidates in our programs across, from a whole range of different professions, across a whole range of disciplines, across tribal nations, across the oceans as well. The one thing I think that binds all of our candidates and all of our cohorts together is that statement down the bottom there. Indigenous and Native doctoral candidates are necessarily political, and so is their research. We invite and encourage it, and in fact we ask why isn't it if we can't see the politics present in their work. So as Native and Indigenous scholars in our program, you've got to be aware of the socio-political climate. You need to write your politics into your work. I work with a cohort on the island of Maui in Hawaii. At the moment, the biggest political issue there is saving the sacred lands of Mauna Wakea from further desecration. So stopping the erection of the 30-metre telescope is the biggest issue, and many of my students have necessarily gone to the Mauna, spent time there, been part of the protection of that land, and often over the last 3 months connected with me concerned that their writing's falling behind and that they're off track. And I've said to them, you are right on track, you are right where you need to be, and now your dissertation's going to have a chapter about the protection of Mauna Wakea. So we pull those things in rather than punishing students for continuing their involvement in community and continuing to stand alongside their tribal nations for the protection of lands, language and all of those things, we encourage and help them to find ways of putting it into their work. It's not always as simple as that, and there are certainly lots of times where students need to say no to things that they otherwise would have continued to do within their communities, even within their immediate families. So it's a journey that does have a level of sacrifice, but it's certainly an amazing journey of learning and of honouring, I think, the knowledge of those that have gone before us many times. I think I'm nearly there. Oh, those are just a few snaps from our cohort in Hawaii. And I was going to have a look at some of the work that they do, but I'm just going to cut it a little bit short. Instead, these are some snaps from some of the students that are sitting both here and throughout the room. I think I will leave it there. Michelle, would you like to stand up? I'll keep that previous slide up there. So Michelle will introduce herself as she desires and talk for around 10 minutes on her research.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Michele Gladstone, and my family comes from the Shwai village of the Stalu Nation in British Columbia, and just across the water here from the Suquamish tribe. And my mother's side is Eastern Band Cherokee. And today I'm standing in front of you as a PhD candidate, words I never thought I would say, especially from a stage. And so I am starting my third year, so I have completed all the coursework, and I am standing on the edge of actually rolling out my own research. And so my working title is Historical Trauma in the Workplace, Restoring Relational Accountability. And so my professional and educational background is in business and social science, not something you usually see in the PhD arena. But my work really grew out of a discussion I had in an economics course that I used to teach when I was on faculty at a tribal college. And I had a student ask me, why don't tribes work together? And quite honestly, I could not answer. So obviously I had to go get a PhD to figure it out. And so I fell in love with this program. This is actually my very first interaction with a tribal university. All of my background education or my previous education has been mainstream. And so I threw myself in and started down the rabbit hole of why don't tribes work together. And I started at the big level because at the beginning I was bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and I was going to change the world. That does not fit into a dissertation. So I started thinking about the regional tribal economy. That was still too big. So I came down a level. That brought me to the individual community economies. Still too big. Had to bring it down again. So the building blocks of your economy really are the organizations themselves. But your organization is nothing more than the people who come in the door every morning. So that's where I started. I started looking at the employees that make up the tribal organizations, and in most places, they're tribal people themselves. So I have been reading books and articles and everything I can get my hands on about motivational theory, how we make choices, and how that impacts the workplace. But I realized something was missing. That wasn't the full story of what I saw every day when I went to work in a tribal organization. And so I opened up the can of worms of historical trauma, and that's what I was missing. So what I am doing is I am working with one area tribe, and we're starting, and hopefully very soon, we'll be rolling out a survey to kind of assess the current climate of the workplace. After that, I'll be following up with small focus groups to get the stories behind the numbers, because you can't just have hard data, you need the complete picture. In the meantime, that tribal government's actually going through a complete reorganization, so I could not have timed this any better. And after about a year, after my focus groups, and we're going to start to actively incorporating elements of our cultural background into the everyday organization and operations. We're going to completely revamp the employee onboarding process and the employee evaluation process to reflect who we are as Native people. And hopefully, if I've done this right, in a year, our post-survey will show some incredible insight to how building a structure that reflects the people who work there can impact overall efficiency. So, hopefully, and I say hopefully because I'm on the edge, I'm able to take the plunge into the actual data and the statistics myself, is that if I can accomplish this with my tribal partner, that I will be able to create a process that we can roll out up and down the I-5 corridor, or let's dream big here internationally, where I can revamp organizations for tribal business, tribal government, and now feels like a really great time as a lot of tribes are kind of on the precipice of taking up space in big business and really more robustly exerting their own acts of tribal sovereignty on a government-to-government level. So that's what I've been doing for 2 years.
So now just going to ask Fire Patsy, Patricia Whitefoot, to come up. Do we have a clicker, Nidrelani? Or should I?
Should I do it? Just tell me what I need to
It's
do.
just that one.
Is that all I do? Is that working?
That's okay. Oh, yeah. I'll click for you if you want to.
Oh, I will.
Oh, okay. Here we go.
So do I just click it here?
Click the right hand. Yeah.
Okay. Shikpachwe, Inknashwanikshash Chwapet, Ku Pashtunwiki, Patricia Whitefoot. Kuthlaninam Ashanisha, University of Washington, Indigenizing Education, Practicing Decolonization Pedagogy. What a word. There we go. What about the English language? So, one of the things I'm going to be working on, or it's a major undertaking actually, is to share about the pathways of Native women leaders around the Northwest. And I intentionally introduced myself in my language because I know that language is critical in your students, either at high school, higher education, et cetera. So language is about who we are. Language is about everything about who we are as Indigenous peoples of this land. And so I really want to pay attention to the language and the work that I will be doing. And so on this journey that I'm on, I find that it's a journey of healing, discovery, and connection for me. And so by taking a look at the pathways of Native women leaders in the Northwest, I know that I will be on a journey with these marvelous leaders that exist around the Northwest area. So to begin, I just want to bring some context to this and some of the background. Since we're talking about colonization, just wanted to remind us that colonization was and is one of the most decisive political and economic phenomena of the last 5 centuries, which has impacted us as Native people. It has created upheaval, death, and large-scale political, economic, and social deconfiguration, and I also just want to say destruction as well when we stop to take a look at the history of Indigenous peoples of this land. And so what does that mean for us as we start taking a look at decolonization, and which is what I will also be addressing in the work that I'll be doing with our Native women. So I have to ask myself that question about myself. So first of all, I want to make certain that, just from what I know about the work that I've done historically with my own tribal people and women, we have to recognize that we are in a relationship with the land and all living things. Unfortunately, that isn't what we're taught in schools, and we're probably not taught that here at the University of Washington or other educational institutions too. I've been in public education for 45 years and just recently retired, and so I know that to be true. So what does colonial thought do? Colonial thought dictates that land is to be taken, extracted from, and are usurped, and change in our relationships to the land and other living creatures is extremely important if we are to decolonize ourselves in our future. So what are we going to say as we take a look at decolonizing this notion? So we will in the future say, we belong to the land and are connected to all things. The land does not belong to us. All people have access to the land, but it does not belong to us. So stop to think about where you live and how the conversation goes on between you and your landlord, your renter, the housing authority, etc. So, secondly, I want to be in relationship with myself, meaning I need to decolonize my heart about who I am, who I perceive myself to be. Unfortunately, colonization has disconnected us from ourselves. Because of colonization, we have gone away from our homes, from our spirits for a long time. This has caused neglect, loneliness, and desperation amongst us as a people. Instead, I want to say in the future, today I take the path back home. I can sit with myself. I can accept the situation as it is. I know it is a mess in there, but I am here to tidy it up. So thirdly, I am in relationship with others. One of the manifestations of colonialism is the ideology of isolationism and individualism, as opposed to working in communal ways of life and society. So what are we going to say? I'm taking intentional time to be accountable in honest relationship with others, listening to others, being a part of others, rather than working in isolation. Fourth, I am acknowledging the enoughness and assets of myself and others. The idea of not enoughness is spread globally by the ideology of colonialism, upholding false perceptions of scarcity and emptiness. So, what are we going to say? I'm going to say that I am enough. I am enough. You are enough. I will not spread ideas of emptiness and need, but abundance and creativity. If we stop to think about the conversations that occur around Native people, we're a people in need. So we want to change that narrative that we are people of abundance and creativity. Finally, I am entering into a sustaining, accountable, and responsible partnership with people and communities. To enter into accountable and responsible relationships, there must be a commitment to decenter whiteness and Western thought. We need to welcome, accept, and center ideas, thoughts, histories, perceptions that do not place white people and their ideologies at the forefront of conversations, decisions, and laws. And one way that occurs is through the policies that are at the various institutions that we interact with on a very daily basis. So take a look at those policies that are in place and ask yourself those questions about decentering that colonization that is impacting our lives on a daily basis. I will instead ask, who holds me accountable for my actions and who am I accountable to? And so with that background, those are the kinds of comments that I'm going to be looking for in the discussions with Native women leaders. Now, I've been sharing portions of this work throughout the past 2 years amongst educators because I've been in education these past 4 years. I've shared this notion with physicians, with educators, with various groups of people to help me move along this pathway. And so I begin with our language, Anaku Iwacha. And what does it mean? If you took your own language, what does that mean? In our case, it means the way it was. And the way it was in our ceremonies, our rituals, etc., we begin with that the way it was. And you heard that we are also a part of the land. And so this, for me, is the Yakima Valley, the Yakima River. There's no people there. There's land, there's water, there's hills, there's beauty. Human race may not exist during that time, and there is a time when human race did not exist. So acknowledging that. So in my case, I'm a part of the Treaty of June 9th, 1855 with the Yakima Nation and the United States government, which established the relationship, established a boundary of our reservation and reduced it from 11 million acres to where we're at 1.4 million today. It stipulated the education of Indian children, and you have to ask yourself, where are Indian children today? Where are we on the scale of education? And our elders recalled the treaty makers who share that they were told, if you don't sign this treaty, you will walk in the blood of your people. So what kind of narrative is that? And what happened at the treaty-making grounds? So all we have to do is take a look at the land. And it's one I shared with our students, and the young people, middle school students up to high school. You know, the land is all we had. So I asked myself, well, where am I from? So our original homelands of the Yakima Nation, which is about a third of the state of Washington. And our reservation today in the purple outline that you see there. And so what goes on in that land, that space? What goes on in your own homelands and in your space or your Aboriginal territories? Those are the questions that you hear from our elders, particularly from the elders of our communities. We also have to take a look at colonization and where colonization began. Do we really understand what the doctrine of discovery is? I've happened to take a look at some of these papal bulls from the Roman Catholic Pope, which were established in the 1400s. Thousands and thousands of documents that still influence policies today. So when we take a look at these documents in 1452, for example, the intent was to conquer and enslave people viewed as enemies of Christ, to take their possessions, lands, and more in the name of God. So what happened when this country was being popularized by non-native people? I think we all know what happened then. Okay, so the lands were, or the discovery of our lands were to be claimed for God and King. So as was shared earlier, it means that we also need to take a look at historical trauma and unresolved grief. And I just have some statements made from Dr. Maria Yellowhorse Braveheart and how she's describing historical trauma. And so this unresolved grief accompanies trauma on a continuous basis, and it's a constellation of features and reaction to massive group trauma. And so it's critical that we take a look at trauma and what the intent of and what happened during these periods of our lives as Indigenous people. So we want to be about building Indian nations, and I have witnessed and been a part of Native women in the Northwest who have that vision in their mind to help build our Indian nations, to understand what destruction has done, but also to turn ourselves around, our lives around, and continue working to the betterment of our people. And so in the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, we have the right to self-determination, and we can freely determine our political status and freely pursue our economic, social, and cultural development as a people. By taking a look at the contributing dynamics of Native women leaders, I propose to record the stories of Native women who have endured in preserving families and culture, relate the values of our Native women and their practices and their demonstrations that they've exhibited throughout the generations, describe the impact of historical trauma, which I just shared with you, identify perceptions society has on Native women today. We can have a conversation just about that. All we have to do is take a look at what's going on with our missing and murdered Indigenous women as well. And then finally, I can't see my writing up here. What does it say? Oh, you can't see it either. Oh, summarize the contributions that Native women have made, to society as well. And this is just an example, this photo of young girls who we've been working with for many years on learning their social dances of our tribe, but also helping to build them up as young women leaders, starting with children who are 3 years old and up. And so by building our Indian nations, we'll begin to take a look at how we're revitalizing all the work that we're doing in Indian country and that you're doing here as students as well. You're the future. You're helping us to revitalize our Indian nations as well. By understanding your histories, your language, your oral traditions, our literature, our writing, everything, again, that's acknowledged in the indigenous rights of indigenous peoples. And it's to help increase the role of healthy young Native leaders, young people that I've had the opportunity to mentor over many, many years, some of the students that I mentored. And so what do we need to do? According to Dr. Martin Brokenleg, he says that as Native people, we need to understand that we belong. For a long time, we have felt like we don't belong. And so we need to learn to trust, but we also need to learn to trust what's going on around us, and trust the environment, the classrooms that we're in. Where are we? Know who we are as Indigenous people. Something as simple as helping young people understand, the life ways of horses, and how do you trust horses as well. Secondly, mastery, learning to take healthy risks. One day I came to school and learned that our Native girls came to school all dressed up in their traditional regalia. They did that on their own. They didn't ask permission. Do we have to ask permission every time we want to go to school and dress up in our regalia? I mean, we get ourselves so caught up in the policies, and where do those policies come from? The colonial nature of our life today. Independence, simply working as a team, such as basketball. And then finally, generosity, learning to give back to the community, building Indian nations, which we learn from the swans. In this case, this is a swan dance. We learn from the swans, and that we recognize that we are people that have dignity, and we want to make certain that we are appropriately reflected in the education and public information. So, at the national level, I've worked with the National Indian Education Association, National Indian Child Welfare, various national organizations, and we have established the first Kids First agenda, which is to take a look at leading or providing leadership and healthy lifestyles, safe and supportive environments, stable communities, and successful students. So as we continue to build our Indian nations, we want to make certain that consultation and cooperation is conducted in good faith with our people, again, as a part of the rights of Indigenous people. And one way we've done that, and I just want to say that in these recommendations, some of us have made to Congress, and will continue to follow up with this, is to affirm our tribal sovereignty as Native people, revitalize our languages and culture, strengthen culturally responsive education, increase Native teachers and leaders, and fulfill tribal consultation and cooperation, and continue to work toward restoring the Assistant Secretary role at the Department of Education. This is just an example of work that predominantly Native women are doing. The women that are on this particular advisory council to the president are, women from throughout Indian country. I think there's only 2 men that are on this particular committee. And so there's a lot of potential clients out there. So if you have any recommendations, please send them my way of Indigenous women here in the Northwest. Thank you.
Thanks, Patsy. So I just want to call on, have I got time to briefly call? Pardon? Oh, can I briefly ask Alan Parker? Yeah, cool. Just want to call on you, Alan Parker, Dr. Alan Parker, to come up just to make some final comments, and then we hope that we'll have time for just a few questions, if there are any burning questions out there. Also, just while Dr. Allen is coming up, I have a few booklets here that tell you about our program and about our institution, so if anybody would like, I'll leave them on the front table at the end. But thank you, Ellen.
Thank you. Tansekwa. I'd like to introduce myself as a citizen of the Chippewa Cree tribal nation of Montana. And I just greeted you in our language. It's been my pleasure to have worked with the Maori people, and in 2011, when I had the opportunity to go back to New Zealand, I went to the Maori University, Te Whare Wānanga o Awanuiarangi, in the town of Whakatane, and told them that I had been working with tribal students in Olympia, Washington, at the Evergreen State College. We had created a special program on tribal government, advanced studies in tribal government, under the Masters in Public Administration program, and that some of my students had been very interested in going on and pursuing a PhD. They had gotten their master's degree, but they were interested in taking that last final step, and I told that to the head of the graduate school at Awanuiarangi, and she said, well, you know, we got accredited by the government of New Zealand to issue a doctorate in 2006. And I will inquire of our school whether it's possible that we could enroll some of those students that you just told me about. And perhaps they could enroll with our school without having to leave where they live now, but would do their work to pursue their doctorate where they are at. And so that was Trish, and she got back to me and said, we've got the green light to go ahead. So beginning in 2012, Trish came out here to meet with prospective students, and we were pleased to see that there were over 20 students who came to that first meeting. Well, 10 of them went on and enrolled and have began their work in 2013, and the first two to receive their doctorates graduated this past March in Whakatane. So there are more in the pipeline. And it's been your pleasure to hear from two of these students this afternoon. So I think, as we have discussed today, and as I'm sure you have discussed in your own work, the future is ours. So I just want to say to you in the room, your students and your faculty who are with you, the future is ours. It's time to seize it. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, Dr. Parker. So we have a few minutes, I'm not sure how many minutes, but if there's any questions out there about the program, about what either of these two shared, fire away.
Go ahead and raise your hand and we'll bring a microphone to you.
People want to go home? It's okay. Oh.
I don't have a question, Mera, but I would like to do a surprise unpaid advertisement for your program, if that's okay. I've been to their university. It's an amazing place. The people in the community and associated with the university both have a warm, hospitable spirit, much like here, the Puyallup tribe around us, very welcoming. Food is often part of what you do as well. It's a beautiful campus, and the area reminds me of the area in which we live. There is green everywhere. It's right next to the ocean. There's a little body of water that leads out to the ocean like the Puget Sound. So I guess what I'm telling you is you would be very comfortable in their program, and you could do a lot of it here on the UW-Tacoma campus. Their campus there, I believe you go several times, don't you, during the? Just once? But you should go more often than once, though. It's a gorgeous place. But when I walked into the campus and saw the core values that they put on the screen, they're very close to the core values that we have here at UW-Tacoma. Now, Patricia was right. We do have a lot of colonization in our UW that we're still trying to get over, but our aspirations are for core values that very closely match this institution. And then there's a little river that goes through the town, just like the Puyallup River comes down through our town. There's mountains everywhere. And to kick it off, the university is on Commerce Street, the same street that our university is on. So it's a natural partnership that we have. Thank you.
Anyone else?
Oh, we're not done. Might be for you, Patsy.
I just wanted to say thank you for bringing that to us. I learned a tremendous amount, but I also, it clarified for me the direct, purposeful withholding of a vision of possibility and prosperity that has been put on indigenous people, minorities, women, people of poverty. It is very clearly that constraint of a vision of possibility that keeps people down. So the work that you're doing, I very much appreciate, because possibility and a vision of abundance and happiness must come forward. Thank you.
Thanks for your time, everybody. Really appreciate it. And thank you, Nedralani, for all of your work for today. Ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa. Kia ora.